Hello and welcome back to One Chord a Week. This is Tonelli, and today's chord is a really cool one. As you will see, it's a bit of an evolutionary chord, which means it comes from all the basic chords that we've already seen, and that's completely normal because we cover so many chords through this series that it's normal now that the new chords are kind of built on that foundation, all right? Even though I didn't follow any specific order, you know, we're so deep into this series that we really covered a lot of the fundamental ones, all right? So it's completely normal that you will need to go back and review some of these chords. And if you haven't watched the whole series, let me suggest that you do, because when you watch the whole thing, all these chords that seem so different one from the other will really pull together and come together through watching all the other ones. And that will bring many benefits. One of them is that you'll be able to really understand the intricacies and the actual character of each chord, because you'll be able to compare it to others that are similar and to others that are completely different, and that really helps out a lot. So let me give you that bit of advice. If you want, do check out all the videos, even the ones you think you know better than others. Still watch the video, learn the formula, check out the sound section, maybe learn a few fingerings for it. It's very important. It will really help you out learning new chords. And when this series is over, in quite a few videos I think that are left, then you'll still have more to explore if you want, and you have the basis for it. You have the tools that you need to do that. So without further ado, let's begin. The dominant 9 sus4 chord, simply sometimes known as the jazz suspended chord, is basically a ninth chord, which we haven't looked at, but we will very soon, with the sus4, a suspended fourth. If you are not familiar with the suspended fourth sound, there are two videos you should check out before you watch this or after you've watched it, just to put things together for you. One of them is the sus4 chord. Now this, of course, is the starting point for this chord, and you should certainly check that out to get you started in the idea of dropping a third for a fourth. And then you should also check out the dominant 7 sus4 chord, which is this one, and that's extremely similar to today's chord. A bit of a different sound, of course, but structurally is really similar, and it will be very helpful for you to understand that chord. All right, with that being said, this chord is used in many styles of music. You can use it pretty much anywhere. It is found in classical music, it's found in rock music, it's found in jazz a lot, and that's why sometimes it's called the jazz suspended chord. And it's a chord that opens up quite a few possibilities as far as sound goes. We'll explore a few of them later in the scale section. But overall, I think it's a great chord because it's not really used very often by, so to speak, regular guitar players, right? So it's not one that is deeply explored, and you should certainly check it out so we don't leave it only to the keyboard players, right? And we can steal a bit of that mojo for ourselves. So let's begin and see how it's built with the formula. As the name implies, the 9 sus4 chord is a ninth chord with a sus4, but let's take it from the triad and build it up. So let's start from the sus4 sound, which of course is a root. In this case is C. Remember, we always do these videos in the key of C, and then you're free to move them around. So the root is C, of course. And then we don't have a third, that's why it's called a sus4, so we go straight to the F, which is the fourth of C. And then we play the perfect fifth G. This is our starting sus4 triad, root, perfect fourth, fifth. On top of that, we're going to make it a dominant chord. That means a minor seventh. And the minor seventh is B flat, which is one whole step before the root. And now on top of this, we need to add the ninth, because we are using a C9th sus4 chord. So we have the ninth, which is D, and we've encountered the ninth so many times throughout these videos, all right? So we have C as the root, the perfect fourth, or suspended fourth, which is F. Then we have the perfect fifth, G. We have the minor seventh, B flat, and then we have the D, which is the ninth. Okay, so this is the basic formula. You see, it's pretty simple. And now let's see what it sounds like. This is the sound of the 9 sus4 chord. It sounds, of course, a little bit like two things. It sounds like a sus4 triad, and it sounds a little bit like a dominant chord. Now, the reason it doesn't sound fully dominant is the same as we see in the C7 sus4, which is that there is no major third. Because there is no major third, the tritone, the note or the interval that makes the dominant dominant, is lost, because the tritone happens in a dominant chord between the third, the major third, and the minor seventh. This chord replaces the major third with the fourth. We raise it a half step, and so we give it a more of an ambiguous sound, but then we've lost the tritone. At the same time, usually the context of the song will imply that major third, because you'll probably be coming from another chord that has it. Okay, so overall, it still retains the sound of a dominant, so it still kind of wants to go to the one, but it's not as strong. And that's not a weakness of it, it's actually a strength, because sometimes dominant chords are very in your face, you know, they're very like out there, and then you can't kind of escape from them. You have to resolve them, or if you don't resolve them, they sound weird, or they're just too strong a statement, maybe in the middle of a verse, right? You don't want that conclusive statement quite yet. And so these chords really help. This one, as well as the 7 sus4. So that's the first thing you should know about it, is you can use it as a dominant chord when you don't want it to be such a strong need for resolution. That's the first thing. The other thing is that you could actually use it without resolving. Now, this is a bit of a more of a rock or modern music idea, right? In classical music, chords are very functional. So when you have a dominant chord, you will resolve it eventually to the one. But in rock and pop and modern music and jazz, you can just float over these chords. You can do what's called a modal progression, or simply a modal melody, which means you're basing the whole thing, you're basing it on a mode. And we'll talk about the scales, but this is certainly a dominant mode, so it would be the Mixolydian or some kind of derivative of that. And so you can actually play this chord and build your melodies just as if this chord was a root or tonic chord. So you can kind of ignore the need for resolution. And with that being said, there's one thing I want to warn you about, which if you look at this chord, you say, well, okay, so I have this 9 sus4 chord, but it really isn't major. So why can't I just start playing a bunch of minor stuff on it, because there's no third to tell me that this is a major chord? And that is correct. And if you were to look at strictly the formula, you could do that. And I've always warned you in this video that sometimes chords are played without all the notes. But what happens is, even if you're not actually playing the notes, as long as everybody in the band or the group, or even yourself, if you understand that this chord has a certain function, it's quite dangerous to ignore that function, because there might be something somewhere that somebody else is playing, or that you played on the bass, or that a synth line is playing, that will, you know, belong to that first function. So if I play this chord and I see it as a 9 sus4 chord, I assume that it's a dominant chord. I assume, or I imply, even if I don't explicitly play the major third, maybe somebody else in the band will. Maybe the bass will go on a run through the major third. So now on top of it, I start playing a bunch of minor scales and I might have a problem. All right? So it's important to understand the function of the chord even more than the actuality of what notes I'm playing at any given moment. And that's something you should keep in mind. Now, if you have a very deep knowledge of chords, you could probably get away with a little something here and there, but it's beyond the scope of these videos, okay? So this chord we will consider as a dominant chord with a sus4, and so we kind of imply the fact that you want it for what it is. And a dominant chord has a major third. And that's why in the next, 2 sections down, when we talk about scales, I will assume we're going to use it as a dominant sus4 chord. And finally, again, it's a kind of a big chord, so what notes do we lose? Well, usually you will drop the 5th. Sometimes you can drop more in other chords, but this chord really needs all the notes, because it needs the root. At least you could skip it, but I like to have the root in my chords. If I have the root, I need the sus4, so the perfect fourth, I need it because it's called a sus4 chord. It would be kind of dumb to remove it. The 5th I can drop, but then the 7th and the 9th, I need them because they are part of what defines the chord. The 7 makes it a dominant chord, and the ninth makes it what it is, a ninth sus4 chord, right? So the only note you can really drop here is the fifth. If you see a position without the root, it's fine. Many styles of music allow or even encourage you dropping the root, but to me, you need these four notes: the root, the fourth, the seventh, and the ninth. Very well, so first up is a position on the third fret, and you see it's extremely simple. All you have to do is put a finger down on the fretboard and it will kind of work itself out. We have the root on the third fret of the fifth string, that's C. Right below it we have the F, which is our fourth, on the fourth. Then we have on the third string, of course, same fret, it's all on the third fret. We have the minor seventh, B flat, and then we play a D, which is the ninth, on the second string, and on the first string we have a G. So if you look at this chord, we're actually playing C, F, G, B flat, and D. All the notes of the chord are represented, and it's very easy to play. For the next position, we move up to the 8th fret of the 6th string, as we often do in this series, and we find the root right there. And then skip a string, and on the 4th string, same 8th fret, we have our B flat, which is the 7th, which is a necessary note. And then we play the D, which is the 9th, on the 7th fret of the 3rd string. And finally, we play our 4th, the F. Again, we must play that note. And there it is. So in this case, the fingering is missing the 5th G, but that's no problem. And finally, we move up to the 10th fret, where we play an inversion. So in the bass, we'll have a G on the 10th fret of the 5th string. And then again, we bar pretty much all the notes. So we have G on the 10th fret of the 5th string. We have the C, the root, on the 10th fret of the 4th. We have the F, which is our 4th, on the 3rd string. And then we also play the 1st string on the same fret, which is D, which is the 9th. And then with this finger, we play the minor 7th on the 11th fret of the 2nd string. So you can see I again have all the notes. I have the C, the F, the B flat, the D, and the 5th G. So if you wanted to, you could drop this note here and just play a shorter and the smaller version and brighter, and play only these 4 notes. Okay, it doesn't really matter. You can play with the G or without. When it comes to the scales of the 9 sus4 chord, the waters become quite muddy because, as we saw before, it's missing this very important note, which is the 3rd, and it has a 4th instead. So technically speaking, you could kind of interpret or imagine that the 3rd that we're missing is a minor 3rd, and this will open it up to a lot of minor possibilities, you know, because really, if you look at the notes and you imply a minor 3rd, you see that there are many modes and many different variations of the minor scale that would work on this chord. But that would kind of be moving beyond this chord and going to something else. Because if you want that, then you will probably use some kind of minor 9th chord, some kind of minor 7th chord, some kind of a Dorian chord, right? So if we are using this chord and we're studying it as a dominant sus4 chord or a 9th sus4 chord, then we should probably focus on those scales. And so for dominant chords, there really is one scale that is extremely common, which is the Mixolydian scale. And that's the first one we're going to look at. And the Mixolydian scale is a major scale with a flat 7. Okay, so it will add the major 3rd to this sound. And give that major 3rd color back to the chord. It will give that tritone back to the chord. And so it's the first one I would suggest. Another variation of the Mixolydian that I really like is a mode of the melodic minor scale, and it's called the Mixolydian flat 6. And we're not going to get into the details of the melodic minor, but this scale is very simple to build. You take a Mixolydian scale and you lower the 6th 1/2 step. It gives it a strange new color, and I really enjoy it. So for example, if I were to play the chord up here, you could have this kind of sound, right? So sounds quite sophisticated and really cool. You should definitely try to record a loop of this and play that scale on top of it. It's called the Mixolydian Flat 6. So check them both out, and if you of course have more ideas, use the comment section. I always try to stick to 2 scales, because if we get over, you know, I'm tempted to give you 100 scales, but it really is confusing, I think, for most of you who are starting out with chords. You don't want to get into, you know, the deep waters of music scales. So these 2 are the ones for this week. Very well, so now you have the 9 SUS4 chord under your belt and in your toolbox. You can use it whenever you want, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If it's not clear yet, let me restate it very quickly. Watch all the videos in the series. It's not because I want views, but it's because it's so important that you start to, especially now that we cover so many chords, there will be some that you'll be like, okay, well, this is a bit complicated. I'm not hearing it. And this one is easier, but I don't like it. And this one, I don't know how to fit into my music. So when you watch all of them, you will understand that chords really are just a bunch of notes. Sounds stupid, but it's true. And sometimes that bunch of notes comes at you at once, and you go like, I don't understand this chord, or I can't recognize it, or I don't know what to do with it. But when you start seeing it, that big chord, you see it as a sum of other things you studied, then it becomes a lot easier. So if a 9th chord is complicated, but you understand the 7th chord, you see what I mean? It's only one interval away. If the 7th chord is complicated, but you understand the major chord, then you can take that step to the dominant, and another step to the 9th. And even if the major chord is difficult, then you can just study the power chord, right? And then maybe go to major and go like, well, what if I don't use the 3rd and I use the 2nd? Well, here's my sus2 chord. I can understand that. I can switch and change one interval for another. I don't have to deal with 6 notes coming at me at once. You see what I mean? Even theoretically, some chords sound complicated and complex, but they can be reduced to smaller units, and then you can build up. So it's important to know all the chords. And that's it. I won't get into the whole why you have to study chords again, but just trust me, you have to. If you need help with this and other things with your music, I do offer private lessons. I have students from all over the world. I had hundreds of students throughout my life, and so I can probably help you out with whatever it is you need. And there's a link down here. You can just email me there, and I'll send you the details. Other than that, please support the channel if you can. Subscribe, like, comment, all the good stuff. For those of you who have asked, we have a support option for the channel. You can find it down there too. It's very simple and very economical if you want to contribute. And what else? That's it. I will see you next week. I'll think of something. I'm kind of running out of chords here, but there's, I think, quite a few to go. So I will see you next week. Bye-bye.